Hey, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming on this super duper cold and windy day. We really appreciate you being here in person. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending our third talk of this year's Latinx, Latin American and Caribbean Studies Program lecture series, 30 Years of LLACS Scholarship. My name is Dr. Isabel Martinez, and I'm the director of the Latinx, Latin American Caribbean Studies program here at Northeastern University in the College of Social Sciences and Humanities. Today, I'm wearing two hats, both as director of LLACS and host to my co-presenters, Cassie Tanks and Dr. Irma Montelongo, but also as a presenter myself. For over 30 years, the Latinx, Latin American, and Caribbean Studies program has served students who are interested in the study of the history, economics, politics, and culture of Latin America and the Caribbean and Latinxes in the United States, as well as the relationship between the social, economic, cultural, and political processes of Latin America and the Caribbean, and the development of communities of persons of Latin American origin or descent across these areas and in the United States. Students can currently obtain a minor in LLACS by completing courses ranging in topics from Latin American film to Afro-Latin American studies to U.S. Latinx youthhoods to Afro-Asian relations in the Americas to more and more and more. You should receive flyers and a postcard with information about the program on the way in. Please take a look at the website, but also follow us on social media to stay up to date about our courses and the program. And of course, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about the minor. LLACS also possesses a rich research and teaching tradition. Our co-op student, where is she? Sorry, in the bathroom. Rowan Sporting is currently digging through the Northeastern archives to uncover and recover the history of LLACS. Her work is placing the origin of LLACS in the middle and even early 1990s, with faculty and students organizing to establish our beautiful and important Latinx Student Cultural Center that you have on Forsyth, but to also bring attention to the issues impacting Puerto Ricans in Boston, and also conducting research on people of the Americas. We are highlighting this tradition this year, and after our first two talks in the fall, we are discussing today our co-edited volume, Crossing Digital Fronteras, Rehumanizing Latinx Education and Digital Humanities. Conceptualized during the first Trump presidency, this book was a labor of love that saw several deaths, a birth, cross-country moves, and above all, a lot of love and laughter. I want to thank my co-editors, Dr. Irma Montelongo, who's here with us on Zoom, Dr. Nicolas Natividad, who could not be here with us today due to death in his family, and above all, my dear, dear friend, Dr. Angel Nieves, who passed away suddenly as our book was going to press. As we wrote in the book dedication, amidst laughter, he inspired and drove us to push boundaries with this book. We miss him, and as we do these talks, we lament the absence of his way more than 2 cents that he would be contributing to our discussions. We miss you, David. After today, we will celebrate 2 additional LLACS scholars. On Tuesday, March 18th from 6 to 8 p.m., we will be celebrating the release of our colleague, Dr. Tiffany D. Joseph's latest book, Not All In, Race, Immigration, and Healthcare Exclusion in the Age of Obamacare. And on Tuesday, April 15th from 4 to 6 p.m., and we do have the flyer for that, Dr. Alan West Duran's A Dog Has 4 Legs But Takes One Path, Afro-Cuban Religions and the Arts. And lastly, we do want to encourage folks to attend our celebration of National Women's History Month on Thursday, March 13th from 4 to 6 in the Alumni Center. We will be featuring the editor and authors from the edited volume, Daughters of Latin America, including editor Afro-Boricua Sandra Guzman and Afro-Panamanian poet Yvette Molestin. And last but not least, I want to thank our team, Caitlin McPhee and Rowan Sporting, for putting this all together for us. Please give them especially a round of applause. As I step aside to put on my presenter hat, I want to introduce and thank Dr. Nicole Aljo for generously agreeing to moderate today's discussion. Dr. Aljo is a professor of English and Africana Studies, and her research focuses on 18th and early 19th century Black Atlantic and Caribbean literature with a specialization on the slave narrative and early novel. In addition to teaching in these areas, she has published articles on these topics in American Literary History, the Journal of Early American Literature, and African American Review. In her monograph, Creole Testimonies and Narratives from the British West Indies, 1709 to 1836, and in the co-edited collections, Journeys of the Slave Narrative in the Early Americas, and most recently, A Literary History of Early Anglophone Caribbean, Islands in the Stream. I get that. I'm old enough to get that. She explores the myriad ways in which subaltern voices appear in the archives. We are especially excited to have Dr. Aljo with us because of the exciting digital humanities work that she does. She is a co-director of the Early Caribbean Digital Archive and Mapping Black London, and the director of the Early Black Boston Digital Almanac. I call myself a DH dabbler, and I often say that I want to be like Dr. Aljo when I grow up. If you get a chance, look up her projects. They are pretty fantastic. So without further ado, Dr. Aljo.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martinez. When she asked me to moderate, of course, I said yes, because as we all know, she's fabulous. So wonderful and amazing director of LACS. So grateful for bringing energy and excitement about the program to Northeastern. So I'm going to introduce all of the speakers. I guess to your seats. So I'll start with Dr. Irma Montelongo, who's on Zoom. She's professor of instruction and director of the Chicano Studies program at the University of Texas at El Paso. She received her PhD in Borderlands history from the University of Texas at El Paso. Her fields of study include gender and sexuality, Latin American history, U.S. history with a subfield in immigration studies, and Borderlands history with a subfield in race and ethnic studies. Her research and teaching interests focus on race, class, gender, sexuality, and criminology on the U.S.-Mexico border. Dr. Montelongo also serves as the online program coordinator for the Chicano Studies program. And in 2018, she received the Border Hero Award from Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center, as well as the Regents Outstanding Teaching Award from the University of Texas System. Cassie Tanks is an archivist, digital humanist, aspiring historian, and first-generation student originally from San Diego, California. She is pursuing a PhD in world history at Northeastern University here in Boston. She has an MS-LS from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and earned a bachelor's in history from San Diego State University after achieving an AA at San Diego Mesa Community College. Tanks served as Dean's appointed community archiving and oral history liaison for the Reckonings Project and worked closely with the late Angel David Nieves, the director of the Northeastern Humanities Center and director of public history. She worked closely with the late Dr. Angel David Nieves to lead critical archiving projects. All the titles were in between there and I kind of got lost in my sentence. Dr. Nieves was also her mentor, doctoral studies chair, and advisor. She's experienced in connecting students, community, and faculty with digital humanities skills. Cassie currently lives in Boston, Massachusetts with her husband, Wendell, and her dog, Olive. And Dr. Isabel Martinez is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and the Department of Culture, Societies, and Global Studies at Northeastern in Boston. And she's also director of the Latinx, Latin American, and Caribbean Studies program. Her primary line of inquiry focuses on unaccompanied immigrant youths, primarily from Mexico and Central America, and the ways that they experience and understand their transitions to adulthood in New York City and more recently, New Bedford, Massachusetts. This research resulted in the groundbreaking monograph, Becoming Transnational Youth Workers, Independent Mexican Teenage Workers and Pathways of Survival and Social Mobility, which was published by Rutgers in 2019, as well as community-based work to support immigrant youth's pursuits of green cards, including reports and programming. A strong proponent of the use of technologies in Hispanic-Serving Institution classrooms, she is also the co-editor of Crossing Digital Fronteras, Rehumanizing Latinx Education and Digital Humanities. She is currently working on a manuscript that recovers a history of Latinx comedy stand-up in New York City. So welcome.
All right.
Okay.
For the Q&A.
Yeah, we'll do this for the Q&A. Okay, all right, so Irma's gonna go first. Do it need to do anything?
No,
Okay, cool.
you're so awesome. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Can we make her screen bigger? Yeah.
Awesome.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to begin by thanking Dr. Martinez, Cassie, the entire Northeastern University for sponsoring this event and for having me present here. I'd like to thank everybody in the audience and everyone on Zoom who has joined us as well. I would like to begin by explaining how this book came to be. In 2009, here at UTEP, I was tasked with teaching a first-year seminar, but in collaboration with a university in Melbourne, Australia, Victoria University. So UTEP had a long-standing relationship with Victoria University. And for the first time, we were going to attempt to create what we refer to as a global learning community, where my first-year seminar would be connected with a first-year seminar at Victoria. We were going to use a Web 2.0 platform that I think doesn't exist anymore. It was called Ning, N-I-N-G, and we were going to use video conferencing equipment to connect these two classes together. We did that. It was successful. We did, I think, 3 iterations of it. And then from that experience, I was able to apply and actually receive a fellowship to be part of the SUNY Global Learning Center in Manhattan, where I learned how to expand my knowledge of international global learning communities. That experience then took me to a conference in Atlanta where I was presenting on the VU collaboration as well as the fellowship. And it was here that I met for the first time Dr. Isabel Martinez. And we quickly became friends. She kind of followed me around the conference a little bit. And I was like, wow, I think I'm being stalked or something. But she says to me, I want to do what you're doing with Victoria. I want to do this with you. She was at John Jay College in New York. And, I hadn't really thought about that. I thought that what I was doing was this international sort of learning experience. And then it occurred to me that this sort of classroom on a national level would probably have even more impact because like UTEP, which is an HSI or a Hispanic-Serving Institute, so is John Jay. And I quickly realized that this collaboration could be really important. So we also knew after our first conversations, we knew right away that because of our respective institutions and our training, that Latino institutions and Latino scholars pretty much worked in silos, right? And that we came up with, I don't know if we came up with it, but we think we came up with this term, regional myopia, to explain the way that, for example, the American Southwest mostly looked at Mexican-American communities, right? The Northeast mostly looked at Puerto Rican and Dominican studies. The American South was, anchored in Cuban studies, and that we didn't really ever communicate with each other. We didn't really ever try to learn about each other. We were pretty much stuck in our own communities. And so we decided that the class that we would teach a class together, right? But that in this class, we would disrupt that notion of these regional silos. So in I met her in spring of 2011, and by fall of 2011, we were creating our first class. The class was also a connection of 2 first-year seminars. And we call that class, I was looking at our syllabi because I was trying to track the sort of the progression of our courses and of our thinking. The first class was entitled Exploring Racial and Ethnic Borders in Colleges, right? So we had that class, and then we did about 4 or 5 iterations in the following years, with the last class in 2018 being Bridging Latinx Communities. So we first started looking at borders inside of institutions, and eventually we start looking at just borders in communities, Latino communities in general. After 2016, we knew that we had enough data to create a manuscript. We were also sensing that we were under attack by the new the new presidential administration and the politics that he was unleashing. And so we decided to join forces. At that point, we decided to join forces with 2 other scholars and who became dear friends. When Isabel says that it was a labor of love and a lot of laughter, she's not kidding, right? So we joined forces with Dr. Nicholas Natividad, who is at New Mexico State University and whose work centers on social justice and human rights on the border. And then we also joined forces with Dr. David Nieves, who at this point was already doing some really excellent digital humanities work, and who would ultimately guide us. He was our guide for thinking about the digital humanities, not to mention the applications and the tools and the resources available for us to meet our goals. So what we did was we applied for a working group grant in 2017 with the Inter-University Program for Latino Research, or IUPLR, as they're known. And we received the grant in 2017, and we used it to anchor our initial meetings. After our first meetings, we realized that we needed to broaden the scope of the book. And we needed to recenter a discussion on HSIs, on Hispanic-Serving Institutes, because we felt like by doing that, we could reach a much broader population of Latinx students and scholars. And so the rest is history, right? The book then, we received the grant again for a second time in 2018. And it took a while. It took us a while to get the book to press, but we finally did. We were able to round up a really amazing group of authors, and the book includes chapters on podcasting, on translanguaging, on digital archives, on mapping. There's so much work being done out there, and we were very, very fortunate to. I want to thank IUPLR. We're very fortunate to have received those grants and to be able to put this book together.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Hello, everybody. Oh, I think there's a little bit of feedback. One of me is a lot. So there's that's already, we're working at capacity. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Montelongo. Thank you, Dr. Aljo. Thank you, Dr. Martinez. And thank you all for being here today. My name is Cassie Tanks, and I was very fortunate to contribute to and co-author the introduction with the late, great Dr. Angel David Nieves and Dr. Isabel Martinez. Now, I really wanted to say something that was really meaningful and really captured what the introduction of this work meant to me, especially as Dr. Nieves' student. But when I started drafting what I wanted to say to y'all today, I didn't know where to begin. I didn't know where to begin because I didn't know how I could encompass all of the love and appreciation that I have for Latinx folks and Latinidad that informs the work I have and continue to do when the efforts to provide pathways and support for those same people and cultures is being aggressively targeted. I didn't know how I could begin to put into words the immense appreciation I have for the food, the music, the culture, the history of place, and the people that made me when they are being attacked. How could I truly celebrate the type of work and scholarship discussed in Crossing Digital Fronteras by the amazing authors when everything about it is being attacked? The scholarship, the methods, the knowledge, the people. How could I even begin with a joyful anecdote about a beloved couple who used to serve TJ hot dogs outside of the potent, potable establishments I used to go to with my friends as being the real superheroes in life? But when I sat there trying to think about what I was going to say to y'all now and really trying to figure it out, one thing really kind of came through. It came through very clearly, and that is love. Love of people, love of culture, love of place and space, love of learning, and love of teaching. To evoke bell hooks, when love and respect for the souls of our students is the foundation of our pedagogy and scholarship, deep knowledge building and learning can definitely occur. And to paraphrase Grace Lee Boggs and James Boggs, all revolutions must be born out of love. Love is revolutionary precisely because successful revolutions come from it. A love of place and people that motivates one to fight to create the just and liberatory world that could be. And it is this kind of deep love that makes Latinx DH hold such liberatory potential for Latinx students, communities, and all of those who really want their work and teaching to contribute to a more just and loving world. During the first Trump administration, while the co-editors were cooking up this book, and I was just about to be sent on a path to intersect with them, I worked at a high school in San Diego, and my life at that time really moved to the rhythm of public school schedules. During spring breaks, I would wake up a little later, enjoy my coffee a little bit longer, and take the dog I had then, a very good boy named Buster, out for a much longer sniff-spection of the neighborhood in the sunshine. Now, on these walks, I would often see a changing of the guards, or kind of like an ebb and a flow of socio-political ties. In the morning, Teslas, Lexus, BMWs, and Mercedes would drive down from the neighborhoods on the hill, and school buses for private Catholic schools would pick up students of all ages. But a couple of hours later, trucks and vans with business logos like Rodriguez Landscaping and Como La Flor Cleaning Services would start to drive up those hills. This nearly daily migration reinforced the unacknowledged border where the main road transitioned from College Avenue to Del Cerro Heights Road. On one side, could be considered by some as too loud, too reckless, and the other side could be counted as being good, as being a type of neighborhood that counted. The Del Cerro Heights side, this was around the time of the Golden Elevator, and when we all thought this was going to be a fever dream, began to be populated by Trump and MAGA signage, like the real, like America for the Americans type of stuff. But everyday Latinx workers, these folks with families, histories, hopes, and dreams, cultural ties to the region, and who Los Tigres del Norte so beautifully said are more American than the gringos, cross that invisible border to work in homes where they were not loved. At this time, I had not yet transferred to San Diego State. I had not yet enrolled in his class, in Dr. Nieves' class for the first time. I had no idea what digital humanities even was. And like I said, I had not yet met Dr. Nieves. And most importantly, I had not had my life utterly and completely and fantastically transformed by Latinx DH. But what I did know at that time, what was my motivating factor for wanting to become a teacher at the time, was that hate and its very close cousin apathy had no place in the classroom, in my hometown, or in the world. So we are here to talk about digital humanities. And at this point, some of you might be wondering, so why digital humanities? Isn't this type of liberatory work that we are talking about hasn't it already kind of been done in ethnic studies? Why choose digital tools over analog physical things like making art or beadwork or writing? And my response to you, and this is where those of you that knew Dr. Nieves will hear him, is why not the digital humanities? Why do we assume that the analog and the physical and digital practices are somehow disconnected? Why do we assume that the latest technologies and innovations have not been used already across Latinidad since to build and share knowledge, to communicate, to resist, and to remix? Digital tools are simply the latest iterations of the types of technologies that have been employed across diasporas for millennia. To that end, Latinx Digital Humanities is not something new. It is not some new modern disruption. It definitely is disruptive, but that is only to correct the modern assumption that other and older ways of knowing and knowledge building, like oral traditions, embodied knowledge, knowing how to herd cattle, and art are somehow lesser than. It is disruptive to the belief that the only meaningful scholars and keepers of knowledge are those within a university campus or the ivory tower. It disrupts the fallacy that the mind and intelligence is somehow separate from the body and our whole being. Latinx Digital Humanities truly is humanistic work, and it is undertaking projects that utilize technology to create scholarship and engage in pedagogical practices that are grounded in traditions and experience of Latinx communities in the United States. And it is work that seeks to build a more holistic and culturally informed knowledge. Latinx DH liberates students, communities, the types of questions we as scholars are asking in our scholarship, and it even frees ourselves from the narrow and very prescriptive types of DH that are concerned with reinforcing the borders of what DH is and is not. Instead, Latinx DH enables inter and transdisciplinary work that seeks to blur the frontera by instead asking, well, what could DH be? So the authors in Crossing Digital Fronteras each provide case studies and pedagogical studies that give a glimpse to the many possibilities of what digital humanities could and should be. So it was really important that in the introduction, we positioned it within the historiography and traditions of digital humanities and the struggle for Latinx higher education. Now that we, of course, refers to Dr. Angel David Nieves, my advisor, my mentor, who invited me to co-author this chapter, and myself. Now, a lot of you in here know that I would very happily wax on telling and hearing stories about Professor Nieves, but we aren't necessarily here to do that now, but we can certainly do that later. And I remember the last time I was actually in this room, he was sitting right over there. And I do miss him terribly. He should be here giving you a talk. And some of you are talking too, you know how he was. And he should be standing here beside me because that's how he really rolled. He always made sure to lift up students. But to that end, it is important to stop and reflect on his impact because as has been said and will be said many times over, he was a DH brain, not just of Crossing Digital Fronteras, but to so many of us across the world. Now, my life was forever changed because I enrolled in a class based upon the title and course catalog blurb. I was a fresh transfer student to San Diego State. I saw Mestizo Metropolis. It was a spatial history class about Southern California cities. I was all in. What I did not pay attention to, and which was quite fortuitous that I was perhaps in a bit of a hurry, was that this class had a very strong digital humanities element. And at this point in time, I was far from being techie at all. But that didn't matter because at that time, Professor Nieves was not only going to introduce me to the digital humanities, but he was about to immerse me in Latinx digital humanities. So that brings me back to La Frontera of Latin DH, and asking what could digital humanities be? As well as the natural extension of that question, what is or what are the digital humanities? So the digital humanities is originated in a field that is called humanities computing. And that is an interest that really kind of grew in digitizing and encoding English and Western literature that was coming up and gaining popularity around the time IBM was developing like punch cards for time tracking and data processing in the post-war era. As these newer forms of technology developed, so too did the academic methods and forms of humanities computing. But Western literature remained at the core of the innovations in the field and the basis of what was considered scholarship or work that counted. And because of that, many scholars and students engaged in ethnic studies rejected digital humanities because they saw it as a project of whiteness. It wasn't until the 21st century that a few ethnic studies scholars, including and especially Dr. Nevis, harnessed the liberatory potential of digital humanities and critically theorized DH in ways that positioned the field as a frontera rather than a border. Okay, so I've said frontera versus border a few times now. And it was important to really emphasize that Latinx DH scholarship and the classroom are fronteras. But they are fronteras in the Gloria Anzaldúa mestiza sense, where people, especially Latinx and Afro-Latinx folks, are constantly crossing and negotiating many borders, seen and unseen, geographic, social, cultural, digital, and political. Latinx DH is also a frontera because it is a space of knowledge building where blending, negotiating, joy, and exchange can really genuinely occur between scholars, students, and community stakeholders. But a border, like the type that are reinforced by traditional definitions of digital humanities as a field and pedagogical method, a border is just that, a border. For a type of DH to be counted as belonging inside the borders of the field, then that necessitated there being other types of DH that did not count. For so long, text analysis of literature counted as digital humanities only, but scholarship built on community collaboration and communal knowledge did not. But this is not the only exclusionary border that Latinx DH challenges. Latinx DH is a framework for resisting neoliberal bootstrapping and tech startupifying education and public services. Latinx DH recenters the humanity and the lives that are impacted when data and profitability for shareholders is fetishized as the only information or type of work that counts. Latinx DH provides an approach to education and scholarship that could engender a more liberated and just society, one that stands up and fights for love, not out of hate. So to begin building this more just world, there are very specific tenets that the editors, and especially Professor Nevis, argued must be put into practice in order to start building this liberated Latinx DH future. The first of which is engaging in cooperative research that reaches across various types and classes of institutions to promote digital humanities and Latinx scholars. That includes R1s pairing with non-R1s, with HSIs, and with community colleges. It also calls for building academic communities with mutually agreed upon agendas for advocating for Latinx DH within the academy and elsewhere. Additionally, to build a more robust Latinx digital humanities, the tenets call for 1, institutionalizing opportunities for Latinx DH practitioners, especially BIPOC faculty and staff, to regularly present at their home institutions and raise awareness of their innovative work. It calls for institutionalizing the provision of resources for BIPOC faculty and staff to engage in and develop those projects during tenure and promotion decisions. It calls for organizing a yearly campus-wide Latinx DH showcase where people who are engaging with it at all levels, from the student to the scholarly, can show off and uplift their work. It also calls for employing existing networks such as HNet to coordinate amongst DH practitioners at the local and regional levels to showcase and discuss Latinx DH work. So with all of that being said, and in the end, and if absolutely nothing else, I hope that love shines through what I have said and what is said in the introduction. Love of place, love of people, love of experiences, love of the possibility of what might be if we all work towards liberation together. So thank you.
Oh, you didn't show your video.
Hold on.
Okay. You want to show your video?
It was just to set the mood, all that work.
All right. Well, how do I get to my slide now? Oh, Cassie.
Well, I mean, isn't that the one concept of digital humanities is something digitals?
All right. Well, not yet. Okay. All right. Then we'll Okay, good. So again, thank you everyone for coming here today to hear us talk about this labor of love that we created. I want to use my time to talk a little bit about why the editors believe that it was important for us to develop a book project focusing on rehumanizing digital projects that were being executed in Hispanic-Serving Institutions and Latinx Studies programs. As my co-editor and authors have said, when we started this book project, we were in the midst of the first Trump administration. My co-editors and I were all professors at Hispanic-Serving Institutions, and while we were all contributing to conversations about what it meant to be an HSI at our respective campuses, we wanted to squarely place ourselves into national scholarly debates about this, about what it means to be a Hispanic-Serving institution, and seeing the liberatory potential of it. We wanted to include digital humanities in these conversations. And so for those of you who do not know, Hispanic-Serving Institutions are 2- and 4-year colleges and universities that have at least a 25% Latinx student enrollment. Universities were first defined as such in the 1992 Higher Education Act, after Latinx political advocacy groups such as the Hispanic Higher Education Coalition testified to U.S. Congress about the need for increased funding for colleges and universities enrolling a high percentage of Latinx students. Unlike HBCUs or historically Black colleges and universities, whose commitment to Black students is inscribed in their missions, Hispanic-Serving institutions have grown into this label, playing and have had to play catch up to reflect and to fulfill this designation. Leading HSI scholar Gina Garcia developed a typology to depict Hispanic-Serving institutions and their practices, ranging from being simply Latinx producing, or just colleges and universities who just enroll 25% Latinx students but don't do much with their curriculum or their practices to support them, and definitely not producing equitable outcomes for them, to Latinx serving, or the most beneficial for Latinx students, where at least 25% of the student enrollment is Latinx, and the institutions produce a number of equitable outcomes for Latinx students, like retention rates, graduation rates, et cetera, and also related, enact cultures that enhance the educational and racial ethnic experiences of Latinx students. It is important to note that, like other minority-serving institutions, such as the historically Black colleges and universities and tribal colleges, Hispanic-serving institutions do receive millions of dollars in federal funding, but with federal funds mostly earmarked for research, followed by student aid, like Pell Grants and federal work study, and institutional support. According to HACU, the Hispanic Association of College and Universities, HSIs, which are mostly non-research ones institutions, so Northeastern's a research one, does a lot of research. HSIs tend to not do as much. They only receive 74 cents for every federal dollar going to all other colleges and universities annually, an insufficient amount that is already being targeted by this current presidential administration. In fact, as one of his first acts, in this current administration, the president ended one of Biden's executive orders that would have created an advisory council examining how federal agencies could invest more in HSIs and build up their infrastructure and capacity. Biden's executive order followed a 2024 report that found that Hispanic-serving institutions are already burdened with millions of dollars tied up in deferred maintenance costs to deal with crumbling infrastructure. A real fear of Hispanic-serving institution leaders is that universities whose funding is already insufficient will be even more fiscally starved under this current administration. And I just want to take a minute here to show you the current status of the Department of Education's HSI website. These efforts will have drastic, tragic effects, not only on HSIs, but on the country and higher education as a whole. For one, we cannot talk about the future and the prosperity of the United States without talking about the second largest racial ethnic population in the country and the second largest racial ethnic population enrolling in US colleges and universities, Latinxes. In terms of college going, Latinxes are the fastest growing population enrolling in college. They are predicted to total over 4 million college students by 2026 and reflect approximately 80% of the growth in degrees attained in the United States in the past 5 years. Between 1996 and 2022, after a dip during the pandemic, the share of Latinxes in colleges and universities grew from 8% to 21%. In spite of this rapid growth, Latinx students continue to lag behind other racial groups in terms of degree completion, and the gap appears to be growing. Excelencia sounded this alarm in a 2023 report by declaring that Latino college enrollment, Latino college graduation rates have remained stagnant over the last 4 years, while completion gaps between Latinos and whites have actually widened. In 2021, at the two-year level, two-year college level, 28% of Latinxes and 38% whites ages 25 and over possess an associate degree, which was a dip from 2018 when 33% of Latinxes aged 25 and over had obtained a two-year degree, while at the four-year level, according to the census, the gap is larger. 20.9% of Latinxes ages 25 and over, and 41.8% of non-Hispanic whites ages 25 and over possess bachelor's degrees. Translated into workforce development language, according to Antonio Flores, the president and CEO of the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, between 2020 and 2030, Latinos will be 78% of the people joining the workforce. It is not a stretch to say that the better institutions are in preparing Latino and all students to enter into the workforce for new jobs of the economy, the better the nation will be. With Hispanic-serving institutions enrolling the majority of Latinx undergraduates in the United States and essentially the majority of our future workforce, it is essential that we center Hispanic-serving institutions in our discussions of higher education, including curriculum and digital humanities, and frankly, the reckless actions that the administration is currently taking against colleges and universities. Totaling 600 colleges and universities across the country, or a full 20% of all colleges and universities in the country, the majority of which are four-year colleges, or 60%, Hispanic-serving institutions enroll not only 32% of all college students, but also 63% of all Latinx undergraduates. With 352 additional colleges and universities labeled as emerging HSIs and possessing enrollments of between 15 and 24% Latinx students, it is safe to say that the number of Hispanic-serving institutions will only grow in the future. Additionally, with 70% of all Latinx college students purported to be first-generation college students, and 20% of all students at four-year HSIs originating from families in the lowest income quintile, a percentage that is more than 3 times that at non-minority serving institutions, it is also safe to say that HSIs enroll a disproportionate amount of first-gen students as well as low-income students. Because of this, HSIs are uniquely situated to be the leading drivers of social and economic mobility in this country. In fact, the top 10 schools that offer the most economic mobility in the US are HSIs. But this mobility is not only for Latinx students. According to the Urban Institute, students across racial and ethnic groups are more likely to complete college and earn baccalaureate degrees from institutions that have been designated Hispanic serving. Asian students and Latinx students at 8% and 7% respectively show the largest gains. In this vein, one of the main challenges that HSIs have grappled with up to this point has been how to increase graduation rates. As such, the primary research questions about Hispanic-serving institutions that have been rigorously interrogated in the past decade are, what does it mean to be truly Hispanic-serving, but then translated to mean in many discussions, how do we ensure that HSIs serve their students to ensure their graduation and increasingly gainful employment? While these measurements are important, We live in the real world. We, as well as the scholars included in this volume, believe that it is imperative to also think beyond these oft-used neoliberal measures of success, to consider how Hispanic-serving institutions, through their coursework, their curriculum, and their practices, also actively act to undo and resist the historical practices and educational injuries that for far too long have dehumanized, objectified, and exploited Latinx communities and have resulted in educational inequities. It was no accident that we conceptualized this project in the years and months after the current president broadly characterized Mexican immigrants as rapists and then attempted to abolish DACA. Rather, back in 2017, as we found ourselves in what we feared was a retrogression in terms of the gains that Latinxes were making in higher ed completion and closing the digital divide, my co-editors and I, with this project, opted to engage in freedom dreaming, an act that is rooted in Black radical traditions, focusing on self-determination and liberation, and that leading HSI scholar, Gina Garcia, urges folks who care about HSIs to do. Possessing the hopes and goals to push our respective and other institutions to become spaces that advance racial equity, social justice, and collective liberation, and to ensure their commitment to engaging in liberatory, humanizing, and emancipatory approaches to education, the four of us, one Boricua located at the time in Southern California, two Chicanxes located in the El Paso and Ciudad Juarez borderlands, and one Chicana far from home, residing in the birthplace of salsa, New York City, together embarked on this journey to add an additional dimension to our collective dreaming about HSIs, Latinx Digital Humanities. With this book, we argue that it is imperative for Hispanic-serving institutions and Latinx Studies programs to also consider, alongside the various interventions that Gina Garcia and others have outlined in the growing body of scholarship about HSIs and Latinx college students, that we must equip our students with humanizing infrastructure, including not only digital tools, but also faculty who design curriculum and engage in pedagogies that will allow students to achieve what we call full digital citizenship, to counter the subtractive and dehumanizing schooling and other socializations that far too many Latinx college students in our country have had to endure over the span of their lives. To be fully engaged, active, conscientious citizens in an increasingly complex global society, we argue it is not enough to simply know how to use the digital tools. Rather, it is essential that our students master various technological proficiencies and literacies that move beyond basic engagement, or just doom scrolling these days, right? To include critical digital creation, scholarship and innovation, digital communication, collaboration and participation, and digital learning and professional development, all with the goals of bringing about racial equity, social justice, and collective liberation. This is facilitated by exposing, engaging, and including students to, with, and in emancipatory curriculum and pedagogies like those that can be delivered in digital humanities courses and ethnic studies courses. In previous discussions of Hispanic-serving institutions, scholars outline values that they believe promote rehumanization and liberation and should be included in curriculum, such as how to resist and to be activist, centering students' histories as racial, cultural, indigenous, and colonized people, highlighting intersectional identities and ways of knowing, identifying systems of oppression and tools to disrupt them, engaging civically in their communities, and understanding themselves and others as minoritized beings. As professors in Hispanic-serving institutions, we believe that these values are a good start, but they must be telescopic in nature, focusing transnationally and transregionally, as my colleague mentioned, but also on the local characteristics of Latinx communities across the country. Challenging the one-size-fits-all regional approaches of HSIs and Latinx study programs, we believe that a critical digital humanities agenda must take the heterogeneity of our communities and our students into account. For that reason, this volume includes discussion of rehumanizing innovative pedagogies being enacted across the country, on the West Coast, on the Gulf Coast, on the East Coast, in a community college, as well in 4-year senior college classrooms. And lastly, in public as well as private college campuses. Elaborated upon across 10 chapters, this edited manuscript highlights the ways in which professors at Hispanic-Serving Institutions and Latinx study programs can draw upon Latinx Digital Humanities to meet their students at the digital edge and to provide them with the pedagogical and digital tools so that they are further equipped to lead technological and other revolutions. Additionally, we believe that with Latinx DH, in the words of Homi Bhabha and in the tradition of Anzaldua's theories of Fronteras, we can give rise to something different, something new and unrecognizable, a new area of negotiation, of meaning and representation. In this in-between space, new cultural identities and possibilities are formed, reformed, and constantly in a state of becoming. These are the spaces of liberation that we must be committed to facilitating for our students through and with the use of digital tools. And I want to end this too with a collective call to action and a commitment to continue to serve our Latinx students with an eye to not only closing our education gaps, but also to ensuring that they are guaranteed access to and inclusion in teaching and learning that are characterized by practices and coursework that aim to honor and build on their assets, foster self-determination, engaging them in active learning that centers belonging, activism, ethical community engagement, and above all, humanization. And lastly, imbues them with the ways and tools of shaping and reshaping our institutions and communities to operate in systems of care, not cruelty. Thank you. So we're gonna have Q&A, yes? Okay, I will move to the end. We'll go in order of who talks. Who talks second?
Okay, and Irma's on Zoom. Okay, so these talks were great. Lots of really cool overlaps, so lots of opportunities, I think, for questions. And while you are thinking about your question, I will take the prerogative of being the moderator and ask the first question. So the first question is about pulling this volume together. And as somebody who has edited a number of these, that is often like a really major hurdle. But I also, what I want to appreciate is the way that you all have been talking about this as a labor of love. And so I was wondering if you could maybe talk about actually pulling the collection together, and are there things that maybe you wanted to include that you weren't able to? Are there things that you want to, what isn't here, or what do you wish was here?
Dr. Montelongo, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. But I first wanted just to mention that when Dr. Martinez mentioned Gulf Coast colleges, she meant the Gulf of Mexico. I just want to throw that in there. Well, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but this started in a drinking establishment.
As most good projects do.
Manuscripts start there.
In a bar. We had stopped for lunch, I believe, and it was Isabel. It's always Isabel that said, we need to write this book, right? And it had to be right. We had all the right people in place. We had the DH expert, right? We had an expert on human rights. We had Isabel and I's collaboration as kind of the starting point of how we could go about pulling projects together. And we were all at HSIs. That's another thing. We all felt like we were under attack as well at our respective institutions. And so I think we just had the perfect recipe for this. There was no other path that we could take but to pull this together. It was difficult.
It really was. It's not an easy thing to do. And I've noticed that most DH work is co-edited, right? Which I've experienced people thinking that it's like not legit, right? You wrote a book, but you have co-editors. You're not a single author. So it's kind of like, it's not really a legit piece of work. But I think it's actually more work to bring all these people together, and a number of authors, and the way that we distributed the editing and stuff like that. It really was a lot of work. Would you agree, Isabel?
Oh, yes, it was. Yes, it was a lot of work. In terms of pulling it together, I feel like I'm off. I know that I come off as like, lovely and whatever, but I have a lot of anger inside. And so like really this book was because I was angry. I'm angry a lot. I'm angry about, the ways in which Latinx the population is discussed, treated, erased, et cetera, and our students. I love students. I've always, I started my career as a youth engagement coordinator in a nonprofit, and my research has to do with young people. And so, I feel like, we're already old, whatever, but it's really sort of the way that communities are being characterized and our young people are being characterized and not afforded, I think, high quality educational opportunities in many cases. It just drives my anger. So good to see that to up front. In terms of who we left out or who we would like to include, if you look at the book, it actually, so now there's like so many people doing DH, right? And so we actually started the book in 2017. We started our project, as she mentioned, in I think 2011. And I think we included in the book sort of the OGs of Latinx DH. And so the folks at University of Houston also, who I want to be like when I grow up, there's a trio or four folks at US LDH, the Recovery Project, who really have grounded, I think, this field and continue to do really awesome work. And what was most exciting was seeing so when you edit a volume, you put out a call for chapters. You come up with a list of themes that maybe you want people to write about, and then you just throw it out into the world and you hope people respond and that you will have enough responses to get a book together. We had just enough responses to get a book together, but we were really excited by the who's that were responding. So the folks at University of Houston, very excited about. And then I also see now some assistant professors who are up and coming in the DH or Latinx DH world, like Silvia Fernandez Quintanilla, who's right now at UT San Antonio, who does super duper work on the femicides in Juarez and sort of transfronterizo work, I think. And she just got a huge Mellon grant to sort of map in Mexico, femicides with collaborators in Mexico, some scholars. So we were getting, I think, the folks who we wanted to get, but now it's just so many more people. I would have liked to expand Afro-Latinx folks in our book. And I think there is a number of people who are doing really great work. And we do have a chapter that discusses that. Now I think we could, have this in sections, right? So yeah, but it's a ton of work. I did not know editing a volume was, and I actually argued in our TMP to give us more points for edited volumes because
there's definitely more labor, but also I think there's so many voices, right? And just because hearing you guys talk about the love that went into it, and knowing that there's all of this love, but this is also an academic publication that, needs to fit the press and needs to be suitable for you all. And then also being from the Caribbean, where ghosts and ghostly voices and those kinds of things are super important to culture. I just wanted to start the first question by asking about all of these other voices that might not necessarily have been in the book, but that you kind of gesture towards, because you do gesture in the introduction about the Afro Latinx, kind of perspective that's in there, but you would have liked to have been more. So I was just wondering about if there were other items that were kind of like that, other topics like that.
Yeah, and community colleges as well, but to be fair, this is a resource game, and digital humanities are expensive. I mean, let's be honest, in terms of labor of the professors in the classroom, as well as digital tools, folks who can train students on digital tools. And so I think one of the things that we found was that our community college, and just teaching, I was in a meeting recently, and I was talking about the project that I did with Dr. Montelongo, and one of the questions was, okay, so how many classes were you teaching when you taught this class? Because this is also these are labor intensive projects and classes. Mm-hmm. And if you're at a community college and you're teaching a 5-5, you may not be able to do something like these projects, right? So.
Yeah, can I say something as well? Yes. Also having the resources, right? The tools to do that. When Isabel and I first started our collaboration, down here at UTEP, we thought that it would be really easy, right? Because she was at a university in New York. And as far as we were concerned, it was probably a much better equipped university because it was in New York. And come to find out that UTEP actually had the much better equipment to pull this off. So if you don't have the tools, if you don't have the resources, then it's a really difficult, in our case, because we were collaborating across the country. But we were doing this when, as Isabel mentioned, when DH was still not, a buzzword, a popular thing. In fact, we didn't even know that we were doing DH, right, Isabel?
Dr. Nieves, who kept on yelling.
David kept telling us. Yeah, David kept telling us, you're doing DH, and we were like, we are. But the fact was that we were able to pull enough resources, enough tools together to do that, and not everybody, at least at the time, maybe now things have changed a little bit, but not everybody is able to do that. I mean, I'm doing a project right now. I'm trying to build a virtual island, and I'm still running into those issues in terms of resources and what's available and what tools are available. So it's not an easy task at all.
So I think, leading on from that question about ethics of care, kind of wanted to think about the way that the book emphasizes methodology over content, and the importance of Latinx DH being situated in and encompassing ethics of care, right? Questions of accessibility, thinking about community broadly. And so I'm wondering if the three of you might want to talk about your decision to really focus on methodology over, so this isn't a book about, right, Latinx DH, which it could certainly have been, right, solely. But it seems to be more specifically focused on questions of methodology, questions of pedagogy, questions of actually how to do DH in community and those kinds of things. So I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more about that. That decision process, maybe highlight a couple of the chapters that you felt do this, particularly well.
I'll go. Let's see to the introduction. So I think we really wanted to speak to, again, who was interfacing with students the most, right? Instead of these projects that may be only graduate students, we wanted to really focus on folks who were like us, who were teaching in classrooms, probably in public universities and again, HSI, like we were talking to HSI professors. And in terms of accessibility and community, I think one of the other piece of this too, though, and I think this isn't just also the accessibility of the book, was also that our students, if they wanted to pick up this book and read about what we had done, as well as what other people had done, they could do that as well. It was very important to us to highlight projects. And I know, that are being done in community, with community. And I often think about projects that can be shared with families, right? When I think about my students, are we doing things that they could point to on YouTube or digitally that they can share with their families, right? So it was really important, I think, to highlight projects like that and write more of a how-to. And because I think one of the things that Dr. Montelongo and I would come up, would find is when we would tell people about the class that we were doing, we were posed with the question, well, how do you do that? Like, oh, I would love to do that with my colleague at so-and-so and so-and-so. How do you do that? And so we recognized a real need for people. I think it's intimidating. I think folks, when you say DH, it's already like, it's intimidating. When you talk about sort of the projects and the tools you're going to use, and there are multiple tools, it also becomes a little overwhelming and intimidating. And so I think we really wanted to demystify that a little bit and share with folks that, you know, you can do it too. One of the chapters, my favorite chapter, sorry, it's not ours, actually is actually from my colleague at Borough Manhattan Community College. She uses the simplest tools. She's, I think it's the First Black Americans Project at CUNY's Dominican Studies Institute, Lizette Acosta Coniel. She's awesome. But she highlights the simplest project. It's a Google Doc. She has a very diverse ethnic studies class. She teaches a poem called Puerto Rican Obituary by Pedro Pietri. He was one of the founders of the Nuyorican movement in New York. And his poem is widely cited, known about Puerto Ricans who migrated to New York City and just toiled and labored to build a city. It's a great poem. Looking at her class, it was mostly immigrant. She decided to have the class create an immigrant obituary poem. And she goes, and each student is assigned like 4 lines. And it's just a shared Google Doc. Each one puts in 4 lines. At the end, they comment on each other's poem, and they produce this poem. It is amazing. I'm like, Lizette, you did that on a Google Doc? Like, and she's got some other really simple, very easy, accessible tools that everybody's using. And so I think we really wanted to highlight that. And I think in the book, the chapters range from, you know, Google Docs to more advanced sort of tools like using Twine that would need more institutional support, using Twine, using Omeka. But I think we wanted that how-to manual because we were finding that folks wanted to know how. Yeah.
If I could kind of jump in, so I can kind of speak to this as being kind of literally on the receiving end. And that was like, as like a student in these classes and being immersed in Latinx DH, and how important really like the methods, the how, the why, the processes of doing it is just so important to go over. One absolutely is demystifying it, because I'm very spoiled. I was raised in the DH game by Professor Nevis, who was always like, oh, there's always a way to figure it out. There's always a way. So probably to the frustration of a lot of people, they're like, I want to do this. Oh, there's a way. We'll figure it out, which can be really uncomfortable for some people when you are at places where it is about what are you producing, what are you producing, what are you producing? How is what you're producing benefiting me, and me being fill in the powers that be. But to that end of like demystifying it, I think that's so important, that this isn't a magic trick that only people that know SQL and Python and JSON, all these things. Yeah, if those words are intimidating, yeah, they are, they suck. But that this is a way of like thinking and doing that is accessible, that should be accessible. And it doesn't require these fancy tools. My very first digital humanities project that I actually delivered at a conference, because Professor Nevis was like, go on and get yourself, if you don't, you know, put your abstract out there, then I will do it for you, was a Google site with just a bunch of media and some like simple Google Maps about redlining and the taco truck wars that were going on when they were trying to make carne asada illegal in Los Angeles. I mean, it's, yes. So it was not fancy. But that is still something that I have pulled up and referenced and shown people, be like, hey, you can do this too. Look at this first thing that I did. It's something that I showed my parents, and I feel I'm a first-gen student. I include in all of my bios, I'm a community college alum, because I have been advised, I won't name institutions, but I have been advised at institutions to make sure that I drop the community college from my CV and resume, because that is not something that you want on there. Yeah. So I make sure it's on there because I do have a little bit of a rebellious spirit. That being said, those are the communities that we need to uplift and that this work does do. And what comes with that is family members that maybe really, really want to get it, but for a variety of reasons don't quite get it when you're like, well, I'm working on the spatial theoretical of the, the taco truck wars and But when you can show them a site, they can understand that. People can see how it materially affects their lives, which kind of goes back to this political moment that we're in about this work being so liberatory, and it being liberatory because of the methods that we can bring not only to DH, but I really feel to all the fields of inquiry, all the fields of study that all y'all are engaged in, whether it's humanities or not.
Great. I don't know if Dr. Montelongo wanted to add anything.
No, I think they touched on everything that that's important.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Great.
We have one from one of our virtual attendees, from Felisa Vergara Reynolds.
Story. Her mom was my first real boss, and her mom was so awesome, and that is where I developed my love for Latinx youth education. So shout out, Felisa.
She says, as a fellow academic, I feel an extreme frustration at the seeming inability to fight what is happening. For example, the erasure of Hispanic and minoritized communities from government websites and the efforts to disappear us from academia. What can we do?
That's $1 million question, Felisa. Felisa is this awesome professor at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So shout out. She's having colder weather than we are, I think. What can we do? I think we have to be in community. I think that's number one. I think we cannot be alone in our offices, screaming at our computers every time we get an update about a new executive order. I think we have to be talking to each other. I think I had the great fortune of we could say it was fortune or misfortune of being in Texas last week talking about this book. And at every place I was at, I was like, so what are y'all doing? So what's, and they actually shared well, we've been in this for a couple more years longer than y'all have. So this is what we have done. And I think we need to be talking to each other across campuses, types of campuses, state lines, it's borders from, to see what folks are doing. I had a great conversation with someone who in Texas, I was asking about, the sort of the attack on trans students. And they offered up that, well, what they had done was just move their resources off campus and are working more closely with the community organizations in their city, which they should have done anyway. And I was like, yeah, why do we think that the university is the center of every single world? And so I think that we really need to be, number one, just communicating with each other and not being alone to figure out what folks are doing in terms of strategies. Felisa, I don't know if that is helpful. Anyone else?
So here we've also are looking more at community engagement, and like Isabel is saying, moving some of our efforts and some of our activism into community organizations. We are under attack right now in Texas. We are. There's a bill filed to try to erase any ethnic, cultural, gender curriculum at public universities. I feel sorry for them that they're so scared of us in a way, because they have it all wrong. But in any case, we've also created a student organization that's coming out of Chicano Studies that is in the community and not necessarily depending on institutional support. And we have community partners. We have this goes back to the bar, but we have a brewery that's loaning us their space so that we can have meetings on Saturday mornings, and trying to always collaborating with our partners, like at Northeastern and at New Mexico State and wherever we can, but really centering our local communities, because again, we're under attack. I'm not really sure. Sometimes I wake up and I'm not really sure how to confront this. It's really bad here in Texas. It's really, really bad.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Professor Isabel, thank you for this presentation. My question goes in, if you could expand a bit more on the examples that the book facilitates, on how, in different contexts, those tools could be useful for education and for even community members.
Sure. I mean, we can talk about our chapter, and I can tell you what we did. And I think this is important. You know, I keep on thinking about this in terms of the last presidential election and, you know, population Latinx is, you know, voting in certain ways, and so there's divisions, right, that seem to be emerging in populations. And I do think that is because folks are not talking to each other and engaged in community with each other. So for our project, I'll share this. We had different layers. We brought our classrooms together to get to know each other. Students from Texas, as well as Juarez mostly, who cross the border every day into El Paso to go to class at UTEP, University of Texas El Paso. Communicating, getting to know for the first time Latinx students in New York, New Yorkers, Dominicans, Mexicans, Ecuadorians, who don't cross a physical US-Mexico border every day or a nation-state border every day, but do cross their own borders as they come into Manhattan from the outer boroughs, right? And let's just face it, there are preconceived notions about groups everywhere, right? Our students had preconceived notions about people who lived on the border and what happened on the border. Dr. Montelongo, do you want to tell them what that was?
Yeah. So the way that we went about that was we had them create digital stories. So we did a digital storytelling project, and they basically went out on their own and did their research and then presented their digital stories. I remember the day that they did that. Afterwards, Isabel and I had probably a 3-hour debriefing because we were so taken aback by what happened. So the John Jay students presented digital stories that had, you know, the wall at the border with mounds of cocaine. And
the assignment was each group of students had to create digital stories about what they thought the other ones
how they imagined
on media representation.
Right. So, you know, people scaling the wall, drug busts with mounds of cocaine, and my students see these digital stories and just about fall out of their chairs, right? They're like, what? I think one of them may even have had like somebody riding a horse, right, with a big old cowboy hat. And we're urban, right? We're a city. We don't really ride horses and things like that here. And then on the flip side, my students portrayed New York as, you know, the glitz and glamour of Broadway with Frank Sinatra music in the background, and you know, Yankee Stadium. And her students were equally aghast, right? They're like, we don't go to Broadway, right? You know how expensive Broadway is, and we don't go to Yankees games, and that's really expensive as well. Just these really off the wall notions of what each location was all about. But it was an incredible learning moment and teaching moment because one, it helped our students to realize that where you get your information and how you get your information is incredibly important, right? So if you're going to Google the US-Mexico border, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a whole bunch of, drug cartel information and murder and stuff like that. El Paso, by the way, is one of the safest cities in the country for its size. Of course, that's because we're living under a network of law enforcement, right? So it would be interesting if we weren't. But it's not. It's not the type of city that people from far away think that it is, right? Like this past election, if you see the way people are saying that their main concern is these immigrants that are coming into the country, right? You have people in Ohio and wherever else saying, the most important thing for me is that that southern border, be policed. And it's like here in El Paso, our important issues are something much different because we are an immigrant city. We've always been an immigrant city. And so we're not, we don't see that this way. But if you're Googling El Paso, Texas, right, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get this really horrible information that then makes you think that, wow, this city is just, there's dead bodies laying in the street. There's drugs all over the place. And that's just not the case. And so I thought it was a great, after we calmed our nerves down because we didn't know how to handle this at first. It just turned out to be a really great teaching moment for us.
Yeah, and then some other projects I would mention that I also liked in the book. There's a great chapter about podcasting and translanguaging in podcasting. Comes from an assignment that students who are bilingual asked their professor, hey, they were going to do podcasting on, I don't remember the topic, but could they use Spanglish in their podcast? And the teacher, their professor said yes. And again, it was, can we use Spanglish and Spanish again for our family members to understand? And so that's another, I think, great example. And then the community archives, there may be at least one chapter, maybe two, and they're doing a lot of these pop-up archives that I love, but working with families who want to preserve, again, this idea of who deserves to be in the archive, right? Has mostly been, you could speak more to this because I'm not the historian, but recognizing that everyday schmo families also should be archiving and preserving their materials. They tell the story of Latinx neighborhoods and communities in all of our cities. And so working with families to start preserving some of these materials.
Yeah, with community archiving, that is just so near and dear to my heart. A project that I've done with workshops, and actually I've been very fortunate to go and do workshops about community archiving actually in South Carolina. I've done some in San Diego, here around Boston. One of my favorite things to go into is to have people find an item. Could be just something they just keep in their purse. It might be something that's in a junk drawer. Might be this is this little knick-knacky, what do they call it, a tchotchke thing that's sitting there. And then tell us the story of that thing. Who were the people? How did you get to have it? Why do you still have it? When do you use it? And even just recording people talking about these seemingly mundane junk drawer things, suddenly a really deep history and really deep connections emerge. So community projects, especially when it comes around archiving, don't need to have all of the bells and whistles. Sometimes all it needs is a camera to snap a picture, a phone that can record video or audio. And this is me putting on my librarian and archivist hat, a good file naming convention. Name your files in ways that you know what they are, people.
Don't look at me, Cassie. Helping me clean up my file.
And just coming together. so there's so much that can be done. I think that's what is so exciting about this volume and like this community that is growing out of this volume, is that there are very high tech and low tech ways to get community engaged. And all institutions are definitely not made the same, but I can speak for the time that I worked at San Diego State University's libraries and their Digital Humanities Center. One of my jobs when I was working there over COVID that helped me be employed, and I actually was able to hire multiple undergrad students to do this with me, is we made free access tutorials on how to do basic DH things. So we have the documentation, we have videos, we have it, we have a disclaimer at the top that says, very sorry, this was translated with Google Translate, but we have them in multiple languages. So there may be academic spaces and resources that have done these things that can be like, oh yeah, cool, let me forward you the link on how to do it on your own.
Can I just say one other thing, though? It's really important, especially with the community archiving, in terms of relationship building and making community members equal partners in this, right? And so I think the traditional sort of way of academia is, oh, I want to go do research on this community. And you go in and you extract stories and data, and you bring it back, and professors make careers off of them and never do anything with the communities again, never give to those communities and support them. And so, and also don't involve them in the ways in which the data is used, presented, et cetera. And so I think that it's very important to, and that takes time. Like, I think that's another, going back to resources that are needed, time. To really engage with the communities as equal partners, to determine how and where and when some of these projects will be, created, shared, disseminated, et cetera.
Yeah. Can I jump in real quick on that? Recently, we hosted some of the folks that participated in the book, and there was an extensive discussion about starting to use resources and platforms that were private, so that community members, if community members didn't want other people to see, the projects and the information, that it would be possible to make them private for the reasons that Dr. Martinez mentioned. And so now there's kind of this, before, where it was kind of like just open source, and, we want to share our work with everybody and we want everybody to know about it. It's now kind of turning more towards, we want to keep this, especially for our community members, we want to keep this a little bit more private and give them the ability to determine whether these projects are going to be shared or not, or maybe they just want to share them with their families and they don't want everybody else to see that. So the conversation is starting to evolve a little bit on that front.
Yeah. To that, if I may jump in, adding on. Sorry, this is like
here all night. Nicole.
Yeah.
Get ready.
Oh my gosh, this is the last thing to say. This is Dr. Nieves. For people who are part of communities who may want to be engaged in these kind of collaborations, or are like pivot points where you are kind of like bridging the institution and communities that you want to outreach with, questions to ask, especially people on the institutional side: where is this going to be hosted? Is it on university or institutional servers, or is it elsewhere? Who will have access? Who is like the primary account holder? Who's the administrators? Making sure that you're asking those things is so important. And if they get uncomfortable, that says a lot. Students will often, when I help set them up with digital things, I'll be like, oh, you can give me your you can give me your institutional email address, but you might want to give me your Gmail, because then it is fully yours. It's not, not North. So just all of these things to kind of keep in mind. Institutional, not Northeastern, not pointing fingers.
And I just wanted to point out, actually shout out the platform called Lucre2, because they're fabulous. And it was actually created by Indigenous folks for this very reason, which is, right, folks were digitizing their community artifacts. For certain communities, artifacts are spiritual, right? They're religious, right? They have, all of this, around them, and not anybody can look at them or engage with them. So this platform was created so that you have to identify yourself. If you are a member of the community, then you have access to the data and all of the documentation. If you do not have access to that community, then you're not going to get to see it. The Black Trans Archive, folks can look at that, Google that. That's similar, but it's not MOOCR 2. I know there was a question online, so I don't know if you want.
It was a personal question, but I know we're also kind of over.
Okay.
Oh, we can take one more question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, I know it's not the center of y'all's research, but Cassie, you brought it up a little. You touched on it, so I kind of wanted to wrap back around about how digital humanities are shaped by being in neoliberal in a capitalist world, and how do we decenter those neoliberal and capitalist desires, wants, needs to that of more community-based, more individual, and how do we use technology to do that?
I mean,
we're looking at you, Cassie.
yeah. So
You could start with Moya Bailey.
yeah. I will say this. I will let the editors come in and say something, but something I've been thinking about a lot, especially as I'm barreling towards dissertation, where I'm going to have to be thinking about these questions with the digital humanities element anyway, is leaning into the analog, actually becoming more engaged with the digital humanities. I find myself actually disconnecting from the digital more and more, because those are the sites of learning. The doing, the feeling, the interaction. The digital is surrogates for that, and it enables it to be done at scale in like really interesting ways. But just because it's interesting doesn't mean that it's meaningful and ethical and right and actual true knowledge building. So that is what I will put forward now. What I was thinking about when bringing that up earlier in my part is actually really emphasizing the analog. I was fortunate to do a pinata exercise with some students to kind of emphasize like the physical active things. I've been fortunate with, again, collaborators in South Carolina to teach, to do a public workshop about digital humanities. And we started with construction paper, markers, pens, and glitter, having people make loteria cards. And then that being the ingress into new ways of engaging with the digital that isn't about what is the name brand tech that you're using, what kind of, again, SQL, database, GitHub, brackety / type of work that you are doing. So that's something I've been exploring more in the scholars, especially the scholars in this volume. And I'm thinking a lot about Maria Cotera, who I have just developed such an academic crush on, and the work that she is doing around the analog and digital interplay.
Do you want to elaborate on Moya Bailey, Nicole?
Yeah, so Moya Bailey is a former faculty member here at Northeastern. She's also the author of, and she created the portmanteau misogynoir, right? So the term that refers to the way, the intersectional connections in terms of the stories that people tell about Black women in particular. So she has this, one of her first publications actually was in Digital Humanities Quarterly, and it's this fabulous essay, the title of which is "All the Digital Humanists Are White, All the Nerds Are Men, but Some of Us Are Brave." Really short, it's absolutely fabulous, but it really encapsulates, I think, a lot of the things that you guys were mentioning, in particular about the joining of the digital to the analog, and not always, right, celebrating the digital and thinking that it's the end all and be all of everything, but also that last phrase, right, but some of us are brave, which I think highlights the way that, at least for me, the way that you all are rethinking about DH, right? So not accepting the DH that you've been received, which is the neoliberal, right? DH and digital technology is objective, right? There's no race and no gender, no class, right? The digital, as we all know, is total bullshit, excuse me. So it is, right, because it always comes through. But thinking of the ways that we, because we have been forced to resist and remix, right, DH, that we have to think about it differently. And so, you know, in some ways, Moya was saying just our mere presence and our just engagement with DH changes DH because it has to look different because of how we're looking at it, right? Because we have been surveilled by DH in particular kinds of ways, right? And so consequently, when we come to it with that knowledge. And so we're going to act differently, right? And we're going to change it and turn it into something that can serve us than just accepting it kind of like out of the box, right? So, you know, doing the
Turn it upside down, looking at it
Yes.
sideways,
Yes.
dismantling it, putting it back
Yes.
together.
Yes. Yeah. Teaching the class, right, that you're told that you can't really teach because you have no money and we don't have the resources to do this, but, you know, choosing to do it in a very low tech kind of way or in a way that, you know, is better integrated in terms of your teaching load or something like that. But like, you know, like shifting, you know, doing what immigrants do, right, which is make do with the situation.
Adapt.
Yes, adapt.
Great. Thanks. All right. Thank you, Nicole Aljo, for moderating for us. First of all, we'd like to present you, Nicole, with these flowers for moderating.
Yes. Actually saw them walking into the building and I was like, what a perfect thing for today.
Yay, good. And we are giving away 3 books. We had a book giveaway contest on Instagram. Follow LACS at LACS_Northeastern. Yep. Yes. They're on the postcards, and if you tag 2 friends, you were entered into a book giveaway. Yes? Okay.
So there have been some slight changes. All of you here today have now been entered into the giveaway. But definitely still follow our Instagram account. Wonderful updates on all of our events we have coming up. Also, just get some wonderful information. We're going to be doing a Know Your Rights series. So just follow us and stay tuned. Our first winner is a person on Zoom. They have already left, but I will get in contact with them. Let me pull out my phone. I randomly spun to see the other 2 winners here. Let me see. Is Karen Vita still here?
Yes. So.
And our next winner is Emily Boyer. Thank you guys so much.
Awesome.
The third one is she was online.
Oh, okay.
So I'm gonna call Hazel.
Cool, thank you. I mean, you could also give it to me and I could give it to her in class tomorrow. Okay. Thank you all for coming. We have books for sale. They're only $20, even though I know that's a little expensive, but yeah. If you buy it, I will sign it. Sale. Dr. Montelongo, thank you so much for joining us. I think that's wonderful.
Thank you.
All of the join us on Zoom. Thank you so much, and be safe out there. There's lots of ice if you're here. I know it's beautiful in El Paso.
There's lots of ice here too.
Thank you all. Thank you. No, not at all. And I bought her butterfly earring, and I was like,